900 years of silence. No confirmed descendants, no verified migration trail. Just a name, written by their enemies, painted on stone, then erased from history. The Romans called them Picti, the painted ones. The word first surfaces in 297 CE in a panegyric by the orator Eumenius, praising an emperor for keeping the unruly north in check. From that single Latin syllable, an entire mythology grew. A race of blue-skinned warriors, tattooed and feral, hurling themselves at Hadrian's wall and vanishing back into the mist. For 17 centuries, they were Scotland's enigma, the lost tribe, the riddle in the heather. And then, in 2023, a small team from the University of Aberdeen pulled DNA from 2 skeletons buried on the cold east coast of Scotland. And the riddle answered back. Not in a language anyone expected. Not in a lineage anyone had imagined. The result, published in PLOS Genetics by Adeline Moraes and her colleagues, would force every textbook on early medieval Britain to soften its certainties. Because the painted ones, the mysterious Picts, were not strangers at all. They were the people next door. The settled story goes like this. A Celtic people, distinct in language and custom, occupied the lands north of the Forth from at least the 3rd century onward. They resisted Rome. They built brochs and carved symbol stones. Those tall slabs of sandstone etched with crescents, double discs, salmon, mirrors, combs. They spoke a Brittonic tongue, P-Celtic, closer to Welsh than to Gaelic. And then, around 843 CE, the traditional date for the Union under Kenneth MacAlpin, sometimes rounded to 900, they merged with the Gaelic-speaking kingdom of Dalriata to form Alba, the seedling of modern Scotland. Within 2 generations, the Pictish language was gone. The symbol stones stopped being carved. The chronicles wrote them out. For most of the 20th century, scholars treated this disappearance the way one treats a magic trick, as though the Picts had been pulled into a velvet hat and replaced with something Irish. There were theories of conquest, theories of mass migration, theories that the Picts had themselves been newcomers, perhaps from Iberia, perhaps from Scandinavia, perhaps something stranger still. The Venerable Bede, writing in the 8th century, had claimed they sailed in from Scythia, somewhere on the Black Sea, and asked the Irish for wives. It was a tidy origin story. It was also almost certainly invention. But here is where the reversal begins. Because the bones don't lie, and the bones are local. The Moraes study, Aberdeen, 2023, sequenced 2 individuals from 2 Pictish-era cemeteries. One came from Lundin Links in Fife, on the windswept Forth coast, where the long cist graves face the sea. The other came from Ballantor, on the eastern shore of Easter Ross, a place where the gulls still scream over the same headlands the carvers knew. Both burials had been radiocarbon dated to the Pictish window, roughly the 5th to the 7th century CE. Both had survived in just enough condition for ancient DNA to be extracted, amplified, compared. The team ran the results against thousands of modern and ancient genomes. Iron Age Britons, Bronze Age Beaker people, Anglo-Saxon, migrants, modern Welsh, modern Irish, modern Scots from every region. They were looking for what every ancient DNA team looks for: a signal, a telltale cluster, a foreign Y chromosome line. Something exotic that would explain the cultural distinctiveness. The symbol stones, the matrilineal succession the medieval chroniclers hinted at, the unreadable inscriptions in Ogham and Proto-Pictish. They found no such thing. What they found instead was a quieter, more unsettling truth. The Pictish individuals carried Y chromosome and mitochondrial lineages that sat squarely within the Iron Age British range. R1b L21, the great Atlantic Celtic Y haplogroup that dominates Ireland, Western Scotland, Wales and Brittany. Its downstream branches, R1b DF13 and the Gaelic-associated R1b M222, scattered across the data like familiar handwriting. On the maternal side, U5b, a deeply ancient European lineage stretching back to Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. J1c, H1, H3. The whole Iron Age British signature, neatly intact. There was no Iberian incursion. no Scythian wives, no Roman echo, no Scandinavian mass arrival predating the Vikings, just the slow, continuous DNA of the people who had been in northern Britain since long before Rome ever sent a single galley north. Not foreign, local. That is the first hidden layer. Now consider the second. The Morris team didn't stop at ancestry. They asked a more delicate question. Did the Picts share a single homogeneous lineage, the way a clan or a closed migrant group might? Was there a Pictish bloodline in the strict genealogical sense, one founder population that defined them? The answer again was no. The two individuals were genetically distinct from one another in fine scale structure. Both were broadly Iron Age British, but they were not closer to each other than they were to other northern Britons of the same period. That sounds like a footnote. It is not. It means the Picts were not a tribe in the biological sense at all. They were a confederation, a political and cultural label thrown over a population that already lived there. The Picti of Eumenius were the locals who refused to bend. The painted ones were painted only in the eye of the Roman beholder. The team also tested the matrilineal side against modern populations. And here the finding folded gently into the present. The Pictish mitochondrial profile flows directly into the maternal DNA of modern Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. The lineages didn't vanish in 900 CE. They didn't sail away when MacAlpin took the throne. They stayed. They had children. They are, in a literal genetic sense, still here. In the bus queue in Inverness, in the kitchen in Cardiff, in the schoolyard in Belfast. Not lost, renamed. The third hidden layer is the strangest. Because if the Picts were genetically continuous with their neighbors, if their DNA was Iron Age British, then what exactly disappeared in the 9th century? What did MacAlpin's synthesis actually destroy? The answer is uncomfortable for anyone who likes neat origin stories. What disappeared was a name, a script, a style of carved stone, a political identity, not a people. The Pictish kingdom was absorbed, not exterminated. Its language slowly gave way to Gaelic, a linguistic shift, not a population replacement. Its symbol stones stopped being commissioned because the elite who paid for them stopped existing as Picts and started existing as Albans, then as Scots. The shift was administrative, then liturgical, then total. And the carvers, the smiths who knew how to chisel a Z-rod or a serpent, simply taught their children to do other things. There is a sensory weight to this. Walk the kirkyard at Aberlemno on a cold March morning, and the symbol stones lean into the wind, the lichen creeping over a salmon that has been swimming nowhere for 1,200 years. The smell of the place is wet sandstone and old turf. The stones are mute. They have always been mute. But the people who made them were not lost, and that is the part the genetics has now made plain. Not a mystery race. The same people under a different word. Mechanism matters here, so let's name it cleanly. Northern Britain has been continuously occupied since the Mesolithic. Since the ice retreated and the first hunters walked north along land that was still rising from glacial weight, the Neolithic farmers came. The Bronze Age Beaker folk arrived around 2500 BCE, bringing the steppe ancestry that reshaped most of Western Europe's Y chromosomes. Iron Age communities grew up on the same coasts. Romans probed and retreated. Through all of it, the genetic baseline in the north of Britain stayed remarkably stable. There was no clean break, no mass replacement between the Iron Age and the early medieval Pictish horizon. What the Romans called Picti, the locals would have called themselves something else entirely, a name we will probably never recover, because their writing system did not survive the conversion. The Pictish identity, in other words, was political-cultural rather than ethnic. It was something people did, not something they were born into in any biological sense. A Pict was someone who lived under a Pictish king, spoke a Brittonic dialect, and buried their dead in a long cyst with their feet to the rising sun. When the king changed, when the language drifted, when the burial style softened into Christian norms, the Pict became something else. The body underneath was the same body, only the label moved. Now the necessary skepticism, because no honest ancient DNA story can skip it. The More study sequenced 2 individuals. 2, not 200. 2 human beings, separated by geography and possibly by a century or more of Pictish history, pulled from a kingdom that once stretched from the Forth to Caithness and out to Orkney. A larger sample might reveal local variation. Perhaps Orcadian Picts carried. A slightly different signal, perhaps the Pictish elite were genetically distinct from the commoners buried in those long cysts. Perhaps trade and intermarriage along the North Sea left traces we have not yet caught. Other groups, at the University of Edinburgh, at Trinity College Dublin Population Genetics, at the Reich Lab at Harvard, at the Wellcome Sanger Institute, are working on broader Iron Age and early medieval British datasets that will, in time, sharpen the picture or complicate it again. And the Pictish language itself remains partly opaque. The Ogham inscriptions on stones at Lunnasting and Bressay still resist confident translation. Some scholars argue for a non-Indo-European substrate beneath the Brittonic Pictish, an older, deeper language layer that the genetics cannot directly address. DNA can tell you where bodies came from. It cannot tell you what those bodies thought, prayed, or sang. The Picts may yet hold linguistic surprises, even if their genome holds none. So the picture this study draws is not final. It is a first clean line on a page that was previously a smudge. But the line is firm enough to redraw the broader story. There was no exotic Y chromosome cluster among the painted ones. No Spanish founder. No Scandinavian wave before the Vikings proper. No Mediterranean fingerprint despite Bede's Scythian tale. The absence is itself the evidence, the negative space that tells you what the Picts were not, and by elimination, what they were. They were Iron Age Britons who never left. This is where the documentary instinct wants to swerve into the modern relevance. And the relevance here is more intimate than usual. If you carry Scottish, Welsh, Cumbrian, Manx, or Northern Irish maternal ancestry, the chance that you share mitochondrial lineage with the 2 individuals from Lundin Links and Balintore is not trivial. It is, in many cases, quite high. You may not be descended from the Picts in the sense of unbroken political memory. The Picts as a polity are gone. But in the sense of cellular continuity, of the small machinery inside your mitochondria, the connection is real and traceable. The painted ones did not die out. They were absorbed into the people their grandchildren became. There is a warmth in that when you sit with it. The mystery race of Victorian school primers, the velvet-cloaked ghost of medieval chronicle, turns out to be your great-great-grandmother's great-great-grandmother. Not a lost civilization. A family, still ongoing, that simply stopped being called by its old name. Identity, then, is the unexpected gift of this kind of science. Not because DNA confers worth, it does not, and the racial framings of the 19th century deserve every demolition they have received, but because it dissolves the false drama of disappearance. The Picts did not vanish into the Highland mist. They did not sail to some Avalon. They went home for supper. They had children. Their grandchildren spoke Gaelic instead of Brittonic, and went to a Christian mass instead of carving a serpent on stone. And the carvers' sons became farmers, and the farmers' sons became fishermen, and the fishermen's daughters became, eventually, after long centuries, anyone reading this whose blood traces back to that cold East Coast. The metaphor that keeps surfacing, sitting in the archive with the paper smell of older books rising from the shelves, is this. The Picts are less like a candle blown out than like a wave that has come ashore. The wave does not vanish. It becomes the beach. It becomes the next wave, and the next, until the question of where exactly the first wave ended becomes meaningless. That is what cultural identity looks like in the long view. Not extinction. Continuation under different weather. Imagine standing at Aberlemno again. The afternoon is closing. The light on the east coast in late autumn has a quality that no photograph quite holds. Pale, low-angled, faintly silver. The kind of light that makes sandstone look almost lit from inside. The heather around the stone is bronze and brown. There is sea spray in the air, even this far inland, because the wind has come up off the firth and brought it. The carved figures on the stone, riders, hounds, a salmon, a vanished king, have not moved in 12 centuries. But the people standing in front of them, hands in pockets, hair pushed sideways by the wind, are their descendants. The wave is still arriving. The painted ones were not painted in the way Rome imagined. They were not lost in the way medieval chroniclers performed. They were not a mystery race in the way 19th century antiquarians needed them to be. They were the people who lived where you can still hear gulls over London links, where the long cists still face the rising sun, where the cymbal stones still tilt very slightly into the prevailing east wind. They were called something else, in their own language, and we have lost that word, but we have not lost them. The DNA in the bones at Aberdeen says so. The cells in the bodies of their descendants say so. The land says so, in the patient way that land says everything. That is what Adeline Morez and her team handed to us in 2023, in 11 pages of PLOS genetics and a few supplementary tables, a quiet correction to 17 centuries of misreading. Not a thunderclap, not a debunking, a reframing. The Picts have not been exposed as something they never were. They have been returned to what they always quietly were: the locals, the continuity, the neighbors, the grandparents. Stone in heather, East Coast light going thin, the wave still moving. If this kind of buried origin story pulls at you, the small studies, the cold coastlines, the genomes that turn out to be older and closer than anyone expected, there is more in the same vein coming. The British Isles alone hide enough quiet rewrites to fill a season, and we are only at the edge of the heather. Stay with us. The painted ones have already shown us what the bones are willing to say. The next stones are waiting.